plan for next week on Monday, we're going to finish up with international security. And then Wednesday is an open day. So Wednesday, there's no reading. You don't have to come prepared for anything except for review for the midterm exam. So look this over the weekend. I do have office hours on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm happy to meet with you individually if you have questions over the weekend. Now I'm really conscious of how fast I'm talking and whether or not I'm enunciating. I'm just saying whether or not people can understand this. So if you have questions as you start to go over the study guide, you want to get in touch with me through email, feel free to do so. Otherwise, Wednesday, come prepared to do review. There's no readings for Monday's final class of international security. There are a couple TED Talks that are available. Links are available on Blackboard. So check those out over the weekend, and we'll finish up with international security on Monday. Today we have Darren Reid, who's the research associate at the Cohen Center, and he's doing some grading for us in this class. He's basically making my life a lot easier and ensuring that I get a good night's sleep every night by helping me grade class. But he's a research associate at the Cohen Center, focuses on intelligence, foreign policy, national security, and so Darren is going to give a guest lecture about the role of intelligence in international affairs. So I'll turn it over to you, and I won't stand up here at the front of the room because that would be weird and awkward. So, Darren.
Yeah. I just realized that I've probably done far too many slides and tried to cover too many things for like the hour we have. But I'm
just talk twice as fast.
No one will understand. No one can understand me anyway. Right. Oh, thanks.
You're actually better than the MP from Birmingham, who I cannot understand the words he says.
Of course, I'm Scottish, she's English. Right. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to cover the basics of intelligence. Obviously, intelligence is vast, complex, and so we're not going to cover everything. But what I want you to have when you leave here is just a basic understanding of 21st century intelligence. I know that some in the class might have experience with intelligence, whether it be military or civilian. I know some of you have probably, don't know anything about it, but I hope that you'll learn something. I just want to start the lecture by reading from The Art of War, which is, an incredibly ancient book. Thus, what enables the wise sovereign and the good general to strike and conquer and achieve things beyond the reach of ordinary men is foreknowledge. Now, this foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits. Knowledge of the enemy's disposition can only be obtained from other men. Therefore, enlightened rulers and good generals who are able to obtain intelligence agents as spies are certain for great achievements. This was written, years and years and years ago, but it's still relevant to intelligence today and national security intelligence. I want to premise my lecture by just saying that I'm going to use these terms, sort of synonymously throughout the lecture. And there are sort of, arguments and debates where, little differences in them, but for the purposes of this presentation, they're the same. So, I just wanted to start by highlighting the fact that what most of us know, like civilians know about intelligence, even academics to a certain extent, is sort of fed into us through the media and through movies and through television shows. For example, raise your hands if you recognise the two people in that picture, like the top left. No one? Right, yeah, it's kind of, right. That's from Homeland. What about the middle one? Anyone? Yeah, Taken. Right, last one.
Sean Connery.
Yes, right. The best James Bond, clearly. Right, but this will be interesting. Anyone answer who this individual is? No? No? Anyone? No? Right. His name's Ryan Fogel, and he was a diplomat in the Russian embassy until he was arrested by Russian security services wearing a wig and having, I think, $20,000 in his pocket trying to recruit a local police officer. Now, obviously, well, the validity of that claim is up for debate, but he essentially was understood to be an operative working for the Central Intelligence Agency in Russia until he was arrested and paraded across the media. Everyone know that guy? Right? Edward Snowden. We'll discuss him later when we're discussing the ethics of intelligence. He worked for the NSA and the CIA. Anyone know this lady? No? Yeah?
Is she the Russian spy who lived in New York City?
Yeah, Anna Chapman. She was arrested as part of a Russian spy ring, working in New York City for years, feeding information back, economic information, governmental information, and just sort of general sort of American culture, which is quite important to understand intelligence as we're going later. Last two quickly. That guy? Anyone? Yeah?
I don't remember his name, but I believe he worked for the FBI and is sold KGB. So.
Yeah, like Robert Hansen is his name. He's currently serving life in the maximum federal penitentiary for committing espionage against the United States. The FBI actually, his job at the FBI was to locate and find a spy within the FBI. They knew for years that there was an active spy releasing information in the FBI, and they hired him to find him, that it was him. Awesome, right? And lastly, none of you, I don't think anyone will know this guy, but this guy, he was a British spy, you know, a mathematician. He worked for our governmental communications headquarters, which is our sort of version of the NSA and our MI6, until he was found in his bathtub, locked in a zipper bag. But this, I use this picture just to highlight, you know, there are strange and wonderful things, and no one's ever been arrested for this. No one knows what happened to him. No one knows if he locked himself in the zipper bag. No one knows, you know. There are dark, dingy parts of intelligence, and this is the part of government that we know very little about, quite rightly, some would argue. So let's move on. Basically history. The point I want to make first is intelligence is basically, can be understood as the modern day incarnation of a very, very old profession. Basically one of the oldest professions since nation states and sovereignties came, and that's spying, espionage, whatever you like to call it. In a great book, Michael Warner's book, The Rise and Fall of Intelligence and International History, he wrote, spying might be as old as history, but what we call intelligence is much newer. Only in the last century has the grim imperative of espionage, long regarded in many lands as a loathsome necessity, been revamped as the profession of intelligence and suitable concentration for government agencies and college classes. So what's it's effectively saying is, you know, with continuing technological advances, greater threats, intelligence has had to be professionalised. It's now a profession. Although it's somewhat, in recent years, you know, there's been a lot of arguments about the ethics and the actions taken by our intelligence agencies and the overview and oversight of them. It's an incredibly old thing, which is a very basic sort of foundation to it. I just highlight as well that, I'm not going to read these quotes, but these are very famous individuals throughout history, great political minds and military minds. Karl von Clausewitz and Machiavelli, all highlighting the importance of intelligence in warfare, and later on in peace. Definitions. What is intelligence? What can we understand as being intelligence? For this, you need to be rooted in basically what you were discussing in the last class, security. What is security? And what role does security play in the state? If one accepts that the basic responsibility, the most basic responsibility of a nation state or sovereignty over its people is to protect and ensure the security of its territory and its citizens. If one accepts that, then basically, according to Taylor, which was the chapter you should have run, security is a fundamental goal of all states. To support the search for security, all states use intelligence to one degree or another to enhance decision making. Intelligence and security go hand in hand within the international affairs and international relations. But it's important to highlight that there isn't one universally accepted definition, like in most cases with political science. I'm sure you've all discovered that throughout time. That there's something that you just know what it is, but then when you delve in and read the books, you have 5 or 6 different definitions. I found this in my master's thesis when I looked at the intelligence implications of Scottish independence. And part of the literature review was establishing a coherent definition for intelligence, And that was a very arduous task, reading myriad of publications by great scholars, all arguing different things, and essentially arguing the same thing, but in a different way, which was really infuriating. The one I like the best is the last. I'll just read it to you. National security intelligence refers to concerns about threats at home, subversion by domestic radicals, or the infiltration of hostile intelligence or terrorists inside a nation's border. Or it may focus on dangers and opportunities at sea. I like this definition for a number of reasons, and if you can think, if you just consider it for a second, when one talks about intelligence and national security intelligence, it's usually within the context of an existential threat to our safety or the safety of the nation state. One important aspect of intelligence that is greatly overlooked across literature is the role it plays in promoting our interests, not our, well, for all the Americans and your interests. The British government, promotes our interests through intelligence activities. The example I would give in Greece right now, some of you might be aware, that they are negotiating with the European Union with regards to bailout money and a way to save the Greek economy. I can assure you that the German intelligence agencies are briefing Angela Merkel every morning about Greece's internal security situation, popularity within Greece, the economic condition of Greece at the moment. All of these are designed to allow Germany to promote its position in these negotiations. This happens across the board in international affairs. Intelligence is at the root of almost everything. So a lot of people ask the question, what should intelligence do? This is a very difficult question. You can define intelligence, in a paragraph, a couple of sentences, but when you actually ask the question, what should intelligence do, you do come up against a few hurdles. Some general points that Taylor points out in the chapter I asked you to read was identify points of opportunity for intervention that might change the state of affairs in some way, especially before conflict begins. This is important because it highlights the importance of intelligence, in peacetime, when there isn't a direct conflict with another state or a group. Diplomats across the world utilise intelligence in order to prevent escalation. This is an important tool in diplomacy and within, governments itself. Another point is help states attain comparative advantage in decision making, thus the term actionable intelligence. Basically, you can understand intelligence as information which allows decision makers, be it President Obama, be it Prime Minister David Cameron, be it the National Security Advisor, whoever is in power, it allows them to make decisions in the best interest of their state. Which is the basic tenet of realism, which I believe you covered in the last lecture. Promotion of self-interest. The state is the quintessential referent object of security. The last, protect the state and its citizens to maximise security. Like I said, that's the first thing that everyone points to when you discuss intelligence. That's the thing that's highlighted in, Homeland every season. Taken. That's, it's about existential threats, security threats. Optimise resources. That's another important aspect to it. You say to yourself, right, this is what our state has, this is the resources we have. How do we utilise that in such a way to maximise our position on the international stage? Which is, again, really important in international affairs because it could give you the upper hand in a negotiation. And integrate information to enhance understanding. So if you have your information located in a central body within government who has the ability, the knowledge to understand that information, we'll discuss this later, and sort of put that in context and really understand what it means for your state and what it means for the future and your neighbours and your allies, you're in a much better place. The argument against, if we're going to be critical of this, is, well, asking the question, what should intelligence do, really depends on a state's foreign policy. I highlight here. Why can anyone answer why the US intelligence apparatus would probably have, different goals or a mission than say Switzerland? Yeah.
We have more enemies than Switzerland. Switzerland's historically been a very neutral country, and it has many allies. We also have many allies, but we have enemies. Switzerland has historically used more of soft power rather than hard power, and we have historically relied more on realism and hard power. So that's why our intelligence is also more aggressive.
You're right. Yeah, it's a good point. Switzerland, officially, its foreign policy is neutral. Switzerland, until very recently, wasn't even a member of the United Nations. That leads some people to ask, then why do you need an intelligence service? Why bother? If you have a neutral foreign policy, which the Swiss do admit makes them a very low risk to, terrorism, traditional security threats. On the other hand, if you look through the scope of the Swiss, Switzerland has great educational institutions. It's known for its scientific research. So when you actually delve into the purpose or the mission or goals of the Swiss intelligence agencies, you see that that's the main focus, is protecting protecting the science that comes out, the technology. They're really scared of traditional espionage rather than the United States, who is more concerned after 9/11 with attacks both within and abroad. Another thing that you'll come across is intelligence theory, or a theory of intelligence. This is a very combative area of academic studies and intelligence studies. There's people that argue that we must have a theory of intelligence, or others that say we can't. There's disagreements of what we should look at when we consider intelligence theory. In Taylor's book, which I'm sure you've all read, he highlights something called cybernetics. And basically that argues that decision makers or leaders represent the helmsman of the state, who must use skill, intuition, and to sort of maintain security. This highlights another important aspect of security that you need to understand and consider, is what intelligence agencies essentially do is just give information. They give information when they're asked for it. They do not decide the focus of that information. A lot of the time, it requires leaders to have the skill and nuance to understand what threats their state faces. Like it says in Taylor's book, leaders must be aware of the threats to the state's national security and must receive information that will allow them to steer safely through the hazardous waters of international affairs. That's referring to both, like I say, diplomatic negotiations, diplomatic interactions, as well as the threats from terrorism and such. Like I said, there is that argument about, well, if we are to develop a real theory of intelligence, what should we look at? The two arguments are whether it should be empirical or normative. Empirical is basically, do we study the current system of intelligence, the current intelligence community, and say, right, this is our theory, this is how it works, these are the structures, the processes, the techniques, the tradecraft, and that's our theory of intelligence. Or should we be more normative and look at, well, this is what we have now, but this is what really we should aspire to be and aspire to have within the international community. I think, with the recent leaks from Snowden and previously WikiLeaks, I think, scholars and certainly civilians are going more towards the normative approach. we understand that there really does need to be some change within the intelligence community. But because it's so inherently secretive, that's obviously quite difficult. So, the intelligence community. What is the intelligence community? Basically, when I refer to the intelligence community, and when it's referred to in the literature, it means basically intelligence apparatuses across the world in many different countries. As I previously said, almost every country in the world has some sort of intelligence apparatus. There's obviously many differences. States aren't homogeneous, so each state doesn't, no state has the exact same setup, the exact same number of agencies, the exact same funding, the exact same focus. Some of the differences that can be highlighted is the structure. States like traditional states, or traditional intelligence states, the two I point to obviously are the UK and the US, have a multi-agency approach. The United States has 17 dedicated agencies to intelligence, all looking at different aspects of it, but 17 agencies. The UK, and can I point out as well, that doesn't include military. In the UK, we have 3 main agencies. For the size of our country, that's quite substantial, each dealing with a specific aspect of intelligence, which I believe is the next slide. Whereas Switzerland has 1 civilian body and 1 military. So one effective agency that deals with intelligence. Estonia has 1. Smaller, more contemporary countries tend to go with the single agency approach. This is true of countries, one can certainly point out, well, those are smaller countries and they don't face similar threats. But what you'll find is they do, countries like Estonia, other small European countries who adopt, this single agency approach, do face threats. We saw it in Denmark recently, where a person was killed in France, which acts as a multi-disciplinary, multi-agency approach. But again, military versus civilian. Some, certainly in the Middle East, countries tend to have military intelligence rather than civilian. Civilian intelligence agencies are really a modern invention. It really occurred after the Second World War. I'll point to I'll come back to that point in the next slide. Level of funding changes, the level of transparency and oversight. Taylor argues in the book, if you read it, that the United States has the greatest oversight and is the most transparent, intelligence service in the United States, in the world, sorry. I tend to disagree with that when you look at the real contemporary countries. Estonia and Switzerland, I'll go back to again, are 2 fantastic, and Denmark as well are 3 fantastic examples of how intelligence agencies can function but still have effective oversight and be relatively transparent. For example, in Switzerland, every year the Federal Intelligence Service, that's the name of it, but there's a German translation, but I don't know. They release an annual report that states, right, these were our goals, this is what we achieved. It's not completely transparent, obviously there's some level of secrecy in it, but they do attempt to be as transparent as possible. When one looks at the situation with Snowden, which we'll come to discuss in a bit, whether we agree or disagree, we'll agree that it's very unlikely we would have found out about such programs and techniques if Snowden hadn't released this classified documentation. Whether that's right or wrong, that's up for debate. There's generally 5 types of agencies in multi-agency approaches. Foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, signal intelligence, military intelligence, and then other bodies within the state that have an intelligence aspect. There's one I forgot to put in, and that's sort of multinational or intergovernmental intelligence agencies. The 2 I would point to, and it's a relatively new development, are Interpol and the European External Action Service, which is an aspect of the European Union's foreign policy arm that deals with intelligence matters. So, traditional versus contemporary intelligence. This is how I split it up in my research. I look at traditional states, Russia, China, the US obviously, and the UK, France, these sorts of states. As I said, the US has 17. They're not all listed. I've split them up obviously. The Foreign Intelligence Agency is the Central Intelligence Agency, FBI, domestic. Signals is the NSA, we all know about them. Military Defense Intelligence Agency, and then there's, when you delve into each branch of military, they have their own. Other examples of other intelligence agencies, some of you might not have heard of, is, well, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Reconnaissance Office, and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The last deal with issues, they build, deploy satellites, etc. It's well funded, it's expansive, it's the most expansive in the world. The US intelligence apparatus has a man in every aspect of the world, and utilising the close relationship they have with the not only the United Kingdom, but with Canada, New Zealand and Australia, collectively known as Five Eyes. It really does give a formidable intelligence apparatus. The UK, as I said, we have 3 civilian Secret Intelligence Service, which, does anyone know what that's commonly referred to as? Yep, MI6. The Secret Service, that's MI5, which I'm sure you've heard of, and Signals Intelligence, Governmental Communications Headquarters. Now, I'll just go back to the point I made about the transition from military intelligence to civilian intelligence taking place after World War II. The reason that SIS and UKSS is referred to as MI6 and MI5 is because previously they were Military Intelligence 5, Military Intelligence 6, before they were made public bodies established by Parliament. So you can see that, the history of that transition. Nowhere in official documentation or governmental documents are these referred to as MI5 and MI6, but they still have those names on their website. They understand that it's almost like a branding that people are used to. We have the Defence Intelligence Staff and other agencies are the National Crime Agency, Metropolitan Police, which is London's police force, but they deal with issues relating to the royal family protection, similar to the United States Secret Service, and Police Scotland, which is the National Police Force of Scotland. They have an intelligence branch. Denmark. Now these are 2 examples of smaller, almost single agency approaches. Denmark, for example, PET, I'm not going to pronounce that name, deals with both signals domestic and has a role to play in foreign. And interestingly, they're civilian, but they're located within the police force. So they're not unibody. They're not sort of single agencies. They're put within the National Police Force of Denmark. And then FE deals with military. It's a military intelligence agency, but its primary focus is foreign intelligence. As some of you, has anyone heard about that attack in Denmark recently in the past weeks? Yeah. Denmark's a really interesting case. Let's see quickly. They're one of the leaders in revolutionising new approaches, and developing new approaches to issues like terrorism, traditional. For example, my research looked at their dialogue forums, which would put PET agents into the streets, which never really happens with intelligence. They would identify themselves as Danish intelligence officers to the public. They would hold public forums, invite people to these public forums, generally within the Muslim community, but across. And the whole idea was developing a relationship so they could sort of catch extremism at its lowest form before it happened, and also to better understand some of the reasons why people become radicalised. Now, one can argue that, well, they just obviously didn't work because they just had an attack. But when you look at a lot of the people who commit these atrocities, the petty criminals who latch on to something, you know, a religion to justify their actions. Yeah.
Will these agents eventually become targets, though?
No. Again, it's not. They're not identifying individuals that are known to be extremists. They're identifying teachers, community leaders, leaders of mosques, imams, local politicians. It's basically throughout the community. It's not as if they're going, right, we believe that this man's being radicalised, let's invite him and talk to him. It's more about catching it before it does happen, which doesn't really happen if you look at the more traditional states. You know, you're never going to get a knock at your door from a CIA officer saying, let's go for a cup of coffee and talk about why you know, about extremism and why you feel it breeds. You know, you're just never going to have that. It's a lot more secretive. What you see is, in these new countries, new small European countries, you see that there's a lot more transparency and oversight. Switzerland's another great example. FIS cover all three major forms of intelligence. They do have a military intelligence agency, but its scope is relatively narrow. So, we've already answered? Well, yeah, I'm going to skip that. Basically, to have intelligence, you need to collect it. So, there's three main types of intelligence, and then there's and then there's one at the bottom, which not a lot of people talk about, but I feel is incredibly important, so I'll cover that. The first one's human intelligence, that deals basically with what you probably envision spying to be. It's recruiting agents, both out with and within your enemies or your target borders. It was ubiquitous during the Cold War, certainly on behalf of the Soviet Union within the United States, which is why you hear of all these stories and read the literature about you know, American spies being uncovered and being arrested. There's technical intelligence. You know, originally it was more about WMDs and weaponry, but now that is growing, and it's what you see from the NSA. It's any electronic device, your phone, your computer, you know, stuff like that. And then there's signals intelligence, SIGINT. That has many subfields: imagery intelligence, communication intelligence. These are the people that, you know, solve codes, decrypt ciphers, look at satellite images and determine what they mean and put them into context for decision makers. All of these, the first three, are certainly your traditional methods of intelligence collection, and each has different tradecraft. Tradecraft refers to sort of the means in which you execute the intelligence collection. The last one, open source intelligence. Can anyone have a guess, a brief guess at what that is? Yep.
Maybe like what that Russian spy in New York was doing, just telling them about daily life in the country.
That could certainly be the case, but what it generally means is basically stuff that you could do. It's open source intelligence is essentially going on to Google. This is not a new aspect of intelligence, but it's certainly grown with the growth of the internet. During my master's thesis, I interviewed a former intelligence officer, and he said that in the modern day, if there's a riot in Cairo, it's a lot easier to go on to BBC News or CNN and find out about it than contact an intelligence officer there on the ground. It's a lot quicker, and it's often a lot more reliable. An old example would be when there was a coup d'etat in an African country or in a Middle Eastern country. Intelligence agencies in the United States and the UK and throughout Europe would turn on the radio. And if the radio wasn't on, they would know there's been a coup d'etat. because the first thing these people did when this used to happen was go to the local radio station and cut it off, television as well. That's a form of open source intelligence. Basically, anything that you could access is considered open source. And this is frequently used, again, by countries like Switzerland, Estonia, small, contemporary countries that really have sort of broken down and rebuilt their intelligence apparatus. The UK, the US, France, Russia, they're very reluctant in utilising this because essentially they're not built for it. It goes against what sort of they were structured to do. I mean, if you look at the name of Britain's lead foreign intelligence agency, it's called the Secret Intelligence Agency. It's built around clandestine operations rather than open source. The intelligence process. It's possible to identify 5 stages from collection. So, first one is when you decide, right, what information is required. The second is the collection of that information, choices of intelligence disciplines and multinational intelligence sharing. You don't necessarily need to get the information you want by your own operatives. Like I say, Five Eyes, the US and the UK have a great relationship, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. That intelligence is therefore is then processed. That's translating the information, the data. Photos are developed and interpreted. And again, communications are decoded and decrypted, which was a big part of the Cold War intelligence. The fourth and most important, in my opinion, is the analysis. That's when individuals are given this intelligence and they're required to put it into historical context and sort of really decipher what it means for the current situation and for the future of your state. And obviously, if it's time sensitive, it's therefore rushed through that process, which has a deleterious effect on the analysis, but it's all about getting it here, production of intelligence to decision makers. It's about getting it to the person that can make decisions. Every morning, President Obama gets an intelligence briefing. That's number 5. That's the production of intelligence to the decision maker. Intelligence failures are human failures. Let's move on to that, because it's getting, there's unprecedented scrutiny on intelligence agencies across Europe, across the United States, across the world. And this phrase is utilised ubiquitously in the media without anyone really thinking about what it actually means. So, it can mean basically a failure in communication between agencies. For example, after 9/11, the 9/11 Commission said that was a major contributing factor. The reason intelligence agencies in the United States didn't foresee this atrocity coming. International intelligence sharing, countries reluctant in giving their allies information. This is an important one that we'll go to, the politicization of intelligence. This is where politicians lead intelligence rather than intelligence leading the politicians. That's what we're going to discuss quickly. And basically the breakdown of our ambiguous command and regulation structures. One thing that's important in intelligence is you know who you report to and you know what your job is. I've done research after 9/11 where I argue that that wasn't necessarily the case. I attribute a number of reasons to that, and we'll discuss that if we've got time last. So the case study, the prelude to the 2003 Iraq War. The dodgy dossier, as it's called in Britain, was an intelligence report called Iraq: Its Infrastructure and Concealment, Deception and Intimidation. And that was basically utilised as justification for going to war with Iraq. It argued that Saddam Hussein's government had access to biological, chemical, and in some cases nuclear materials, and wouldn't be afraid to use it. In its opening paragraph, it tries to give itself validity through stating a number of sources, including intelligence material, contribute to this report, which it instantly gives it some sort of validation and some, respect. And all information within this report was garnered from one source, or the majority of it certainly, and his code name was Curveball. And politicians in both the US and the UK utilised this report and the information he supplied, even though German intelligence officers and UK intelligence officers raised fears about the authenticity of it. They're essentially saying to the politicians, look, we can't prove and we can't uphold what this individual's telling us, and they used it anyway. And this person was a former employee of Saddam Hussein who fled Iraq in fear of his life. And some argue now that he simply told them what they wanted to hear. If you want to learn about, the Iraq War and the arguments about what happened and the intelligence failures, I recommend watching this movie. It's called In the Loop. It's not necessarily about the Iraq War, but it's basically a narrative basically that highlights what happened during the Iraq War. It's very funny. It's a British comedy. I'm just going to see what I have left to. Yeah, I don't think we have time. I even clipped it up and gave you a good clip there. If I have time at the end, I'll put it on. And it really just shows how ridiculous this whole thing was, and that politicians involved in it have now come out and said that it was really just politicians knew very well that this stuff wasn't true, or likely wasn't true, and they utilised it anyway. So we'll hopefully come back to that. This is the most important aspect of intelligence, and the most interesting, I'd argue, at the moment, is the legal and ethical implications. Under domestic law, every country allows for its government to send agents to other countries to recruit, to send officers to other countries to recruit agents. Agents basically refers to an individual who will spy on his own country. But also, almost every country has domestic law that prohibits their own citizens from giving information to foreign sources. It's a bit of hypocrisy, but it's just the way the international world works, the international community. Can I have hands up? I know you've read it now, but prior to reading the slide, who would have said that espionage or spying was illegal under international law? No? Well, you're all right. I've read a lot of good papers on this, and the argument for this is, the best argument I've come across is Hart, who said nations collect intelligence to deter and minimize the likelihood of surprise attacks, to facilitate diplomatic, economic and military action in defence of a nation in the event of hostilities, and neither peace nor way to deter or defend against actions by individuals, groups or a nation that would constitute a threat to the international peace and security, although it can affect the territorial sovereignty of the target, is nevertheless critical to maintaining peace and international security. So the point of view of the international community and the United Nations and countries in general is, yes, it does have intelligence gathering and collection does have a deleterious effect on one's sovereignty, but it's a necessary evil. Which is why when spies are found, they're usually cloaked in diplomatic cover and they're quietly, asked to leave the country and replaced 2 days later with a new intelligence officer. Ethics of intelligence is a really interesting aspect to it, and it's one that hasn't had a lot of work. One of the best came from Ross Bellamy. He's a friend of mine who did his PhD on the ethics of intelligence, and he created this framework that dealt with different aspects of intelligence. I know you probably can't see it, and he split it into what he called the ladder of escalation. He utilised just war theory and applied it to different things. So we have, as a level 1, CCTV, focused on one individual. So how do we justify that surveillance on an individual? We suspects suspicious activity. An operator has authorized it, and an operator has authorized that specific focus on that specific person. We're all the way up to torture, where there's no just cause, no legitimate target possible. Basically, what Ross is trying to do here is understand the current tradecraft that is frequently utilised and apply a theoretical approach previously to war to intelligence, with the idea that this would limit unruly activity like enhanced interrogation, like what we saw with Edward Snowden and that sort of surveillance state against foreign nationals within American borders. And what I was going to do at the end was just have two sort of discussions about the case studies. But we don't really have time. I'll do the last one. Basically, we all know what happened with Edward Snowden. He released an abundance of classified materials illegally, and then fled to Hong Kong, and then later Russia, where he currently resides. I graduated from the University of Glasgow, and we have a position there called Rector, and it's basically a student representative. It's generally famous people and well-established academics. Last year, the students of the University of Glasgow elected Edward Snowden as our rector, so he video conferences into important meetings and such. Whether you like him or dislike him, I disagreed with it, but it just shows sort of, he's one of America's most wanted individuals, but he still is, being rectors of universities, speaking at conferences and such. And obviously enhanced interrogation raised an important issue for the ethics of intelligence. We have like 1 minute left, and I apologise that I did too many slides and never got to the case studies, because I was really wanting to hear your thoughts on it, but do you just want to watch the 3-minute clip that I had from In the Loop? It's kind of funny, and it shows a lot basically about, it highlights what can happen when intelligence fails. And I'll set up the premise really quickly. Basically, they're at the United Nations, and they're trying to, this isn't going to work, is it? They're trying to sort of basically convince the international community to approve action in this foreign country. And we have two characters. The one that's swearing a lot is a Scottish chief of staff who's trying to acquire this intelligence for the American defense secretary, and you'll understand when you watch it. It's very funny, and it does make a serious point under all the swearing and levity. But I don't even know if I'll label it sound. But I know you've got places to go, but this will be worth it. I think. You might not like it. It's British enough, but.
Was you really Clinton's walk?
Right.
Maybe. Oh, right. And it wasn't. It wasn't. That's what you're going to say when they come and slip a hood over your head and fly to Diego Garcia and carry out a cavity search.
I don't actually recall. It was a very busy time.
That's better. Okay, I am putting you on a probationary period from today until the end of recording time. Do you understand? Yes. You're my guy now, right? Yep. I own you. You're my kunta-kinte. Go and get your fucking laptop. Mr. Ambassador, with your big baldy head, you are spoiling us.
Excuse me, just a second. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that by some huge personal effort on my behalf, I'm going to bring you in.
What you'll see is there's at one point where there's people back in London actually clocking pace and stuff, and calling it intelligence. This just raises issues of what is intelligence and what is valid intelligence and what is actually bullshit. Which a big part of intelligence is actually figuring out
Right, Franklin, that's I've got good news for you. You're not fired. Well, that's great news, isn't it?
Well, it sounds ominous.
Right, we want to get these wells out there properly, in the public domain. We just need to refine it.
What sort of file?
Just mess it all up, move the paragraphs around, change the name of the main informant.
Well, that's a complete fabrication.
Change the guy's name doesn't make any difference. man? Eh? To Mr. and Mrs. Man, a son, ice. So we just change it to another name. What's the name of the fuck with this?
Happens to be Debussy.
Debussy. Well, we'll change it to Debussy then.
No, we will not.
Your prints are going to be all over this, Michael. But that's the only way you can save your job, you leaky fuck.
Don't make me do this. Somebody must have come in there and used the fax machine.
See, it could be anyone.
Fax machine? Oh, no, don't worry about that. No, I made that up. No, the document was leaked by email. It's just, you know, the fax machine was there and it's easier to kick. Come on! Thick white duke! Come with me!
Right, okay. Exactly, you got it up?
Yeah, it's all fine.
Okay, cut the top paragraph, paste it into page 5.
Right, yeah, we've done it.
Page 6, get rid of the footnotes.
Done.
Go to page 9.
Go to page 9.
Highlight from that page right to the end of the document.
Go on, do it. I can't.
Right, okay. Delete.
Right, okay, we're going to delete it.
You can't delete the arguments against the wall.
Oh, there's a little shake of the head here, Mark. I think he's crashed.
Just give my thumb down as it works.
Let me just try a bit of manual override. Let's see if it is possible to delete the arguments against the law. Hey! It's done.
Great, right, attach that to the email.
Yes, done it, done it.
Let's go to the printer. Japanese, they're not.
Well, we can't present it like this.
No, we can't present it about. Go get me a blue folder.
Well, okay, where from?
I don't know, God. I'm like about to put a fucking steak together. I don't want to stay in 5-star hotels.
Take out all the conditions, like might becomes instead of might have found, okay? You know, Dave, you just rewrite the whole damn thing. Clarity sentence. That's what I want. Take them all out. Take them out. What is it?
The interior guy's coming from.
Yeah.
I think that I am owed a massive, groveling apology.
Congratulations, huh? Maybe they'll give you a knighthood.
Right, so you get the point, that's time up, but you get the point that they were calling this intelligence, intel, it's a funny way of putting it, but that's really essentially the argument of what happened in the run-up to Iraq. I'm not saying that that's exactly like that, but certainly the intelligence is questionable and whether they knew it was questionable. And these are issues that are, you know, throughout intelligence. The validity of information is key. So thanks very much. I like that because you've never clapped Rob, so I'll take that. That's awesome.
Not good at the damn clapping. Everybody have a good weekend. Look over that review sheet and let me know if you have any questions.